welcome to the debate. So, imagine hiring an auditor to review a company's financial ledgers, right? But you hand them a pencil that automatically erases and rewrites the numbers based on, well, whatever the CEO happens to be thinking at that exact moment. You'd never trust that audit.
Right, yeah. The audit becomes completely meaningless. I mean, the tool of measurement is fundamentally compromised by the volatile environment it's, actually supposed to be measuring.
Exactly. It's a structural failure. You cannot trust an assessment when the observer and the observed share the exact same space. And that really sets the stage for what we're digging into today. We are examining a revolutionary framework proposed by Theta Cog, which basically attempts to solve the AI liability crisis by using silicon-level hardware attestation.
Yeah, specifically looking at CPU cache miscounters.
Right. To put it simply, they're looking directly at the physical CPU, how often it fails to find data in its immediate memory. To verify an AI agent's role continuity, they use SimHash combinational logic to do this. And the central question we are exploring today is this: can monitoring physical hardware execution definitively verify an AI semantic intent? Like, does it actually provide the ultimate tamper-proof standard for AI insurance?
Or conversely, does compressing all that complex, nuanced meaning into a single silicon gate just oversimplify the true nature of AI risk? Does it create a false sense of security?
And just to establish our baseline, this entire debate emerges strictly from the provided source material detailing Theta Cog's technical architecture, their patent claims, and their go-to-market strategy.
Absolutely.
So for today's show, I'll be arguing that moving verification to the hardware layer is a totally necessary paradigm shift. It escapes the limits of software auditing and is the only way to unlock the trillion-dollar insured AI economy.
And I'll be contending that, despite its brilliant engineering, relying on physical substrate metrics just cannot fully bridge the semantic gap. Measuring a cache miss doesn't perfectly verify actual intent.
Well, let's start by framing just how significant this shift actually is. What Theta Cog is proposing is basically computing's missing second entry.
Like double-entry bookkeeping?
Exactly. It's perfectly analogous to Luca Pacioli's 1494 codification of double-entry bookkeeping. Before Pacioli, ledgers were single entry, just one list of numbers. He didn't magically prevent fraud, but he made it structurally detectable, right? By requiring two independent books that must mathematically reconcile.
Right, and right now, AI safety is entirely single entry.
Yes, we have software monitoring software. And per Rice's theorem from 1953, we know that means the auditor shares the exact same failure domain as the model itself. The beauty of Theta Cog is that they utilize a lightweight Rust daemon that reads L1D cache miss patterns, and it uses a SimHash XOR gate running in AC0 complexity.
Which means it happens instantaneously.
In one single clock cycle, verification becomes an instantaneous physical fact. This creates the Attested Insurability Receipt, or the AIR. It's a tamper-proof signal that actuaries can finally underwrite. We're converting probabilistic feels-safe guardrails into, well, hard mathematical accountability.
Okay, I have to jump in here because I don't deny that the PMU, the Performance Monitoring Unit, is an extraordinary observability tool. The sidecar approach is great, but it inherently suffers from an architectural compression limit. I mean, the material itself openly admits to a coarse greening frame at step 5 of the build state ledger.
Right, the 64-bit signature.
Yeah, exactly. To get that instantaneous ACO speed, you are compressing an agent's massive, complex actions into a 64-bit signature via an FNV1A seeded SimHash. And the text tells us this yields an 80 recall rate.
Which is 20% missed nuance, yes.
Right. Measuring the physical symptom, the cache miss, is not perfectly synonymous with verifying meaning. If a deployer incorrectly defines the 144-cell behavioral lattice, the hardware gate will flawlessly, deterministically enforce the wrong behavior. It leaves a massive semantic vulnerability that actuaries might completely misinterpret as total safety.
Okay, wait. I hear the concern about the 0.80 recall rate, but let's look at why that physical symptom is literally the only objective truth we have. When we talk about AI safety, we have to grasp that the river is the prompt.
What do you mean by that?
Any software audit run after the fact operates on a cache that the audit itself just altered. You can't step in the same digital river twice. The hardware combinational gate solves this because the address an AI reaches physically is the meaning of where it is. It's the S equals P equals H wiring. State equals prompt equals hardware.
Right, the Ritonavir analogy from the text.
Yes, exactly. Just like the drug Ritonavir. The exact same chemical atoms folded into a useless polymorph. The chemistry was identical, but the physical shape changed and the drug stopped working. Identical AI software bits can drift based purely on cache routing. That's Macron's law. It proves that physical substrate measurement is the absolute only true verification. Software is blind to its own drift.
Okay, the Ritonavir analogy is brilliant, I'll give you that. But you're focusing entirely on the execution and ignoring the ingest layer.
How so?
The software orchestrator still has to broadcast its intent via the Air Adapter SDK, right? Using the Model Context Protocol. So, I have to ask, how can a system be entirely hardware reliant when the semantic lane itself is set by a highly compressible 64-bit n-gram software window? The hardware is just enforcing boundaries that fallible software wrote.
Well, because that n-gram window isn't a flaw. It's a tunable software dial meant specifically to capture order awareness before the hardware gate ever fires. Look, if the 144-cell lattice produces an infinite semantic reach for a grounded agent, isn't that 0.80 recall just an acceptable architectural boundary?
A 20% blind spot is acceptable?
Compared to what we have now, yes. Think about it. The substrate attestation coverage currently held by every frontier vendor, OpenAI, Anthropic, is 0%. Zero. I'll take a deterministic physical gate with an 80.80 recall over software hallucinating about software any day of the week.
I mean, I agree that 0% isn't great, but let's look at those hardware realities a bit closer. You claim this physical proof is absolute, but let's look at the capability matrix across different operating systems.
Okay, Linux versus macOS.
Exactly. On Linux, yes, you get in-process counter reads in about 50 nanoseconds via that documented perf event open syscall. That's direct. But macOS restricts raw counters behind a private K-perf framework.
Right, so they use a latency curve.
Which is inference. On Mac, Theta Cog has to rely on an unprivileged pointer chase latency curve. Basically, they know an L1 miss takes about 2 nanoseconds and a DRAM miss takes about 150 nanoseconds. So they use a stopwatch to infer what the counters would measure. I argue that relying on latency inference instead of direct in-process attribution deeply dilutes the whole claim of absolute tamper-proof grounding.
I have to disagree strongly there. The latency curve is already a real, reproducible, per-commit substrate signal. It's not a guess, it's physics.
But it's indirect.
It doesn't matter because the tier separation is so massive. It's like a 2x penalty per tier and a 75.1x penalty from L1 all the way to DRAM. The separation is so clean that a full 12 by 12 metavector ballistic pass is actually cheaper than a single DRAM round trip.
Wow, okay.
Right? It proves the combinational verifier operates entirely below the failure domain of the workload it measures, regardless of whether it's Mac or Linux. The software literally cannot compute a lie fast enough to fake the latency. It's physically impossible.
Okay, I can see the physics of the latency curve or sound. The stopwatch works. But let's shift gears to how this actually triggers this massive economic re-architecture they're talking about, the actuarial unit.
Oh, the OBD2 dongle analogy? I love this part.
Right. The text frames the AIR daemon as the Progressive Auto Insurance OBD2 dongle from 1996, but scaled for AI.
Yeah, and by denominating trust debt in basis points of cash miss rates, insurers like Munich Re and AIG can actually underwrite this stuff. They can finally reverse those broad CG4047 and CG4048 generative AI carve-outs. Because right now, insurers won't touch Gen AI with a 10-foot pole.
True. The liability is too opaque.
Exactly, but once you have this physical receipt, you hit that 16% asymmetric crossover of early adoption, and once that hits, ungrounded competitors simply won't be able to price their own risk. Their premiums will be too high, effectively routing ungrounded AIs off the network.
I'll admit the go-to-market strategy is genius. Creating a Visa and ARM dual comp model to birth a new $500 billion asset class is frankly visionary. but you're glossing over the text's explicit warning about lattice definition failure.
I wouldn't say I'm glossing over it.
Well, let's use your OBD2 dongle analogy. If you put that dongle in a car, right, but you program the GPS to drive the car directly off a cliff, that dongle will perfectly attest that the engine was running smoothly, the brakes were fine, while the car crashes into the ravine.
Sure, but
The hardware receipt limits gross negligence, yes, but it doesn't magically cure the liability of deploying a poorly defined agent. The semantic gap is still there.
But that's the thing. The hardware isn't supposed to cure human stupidity. The underwriter isn't ensuring the deployer's bad instructions. They are ensuring the agent's structural continuity. If you tell an AI to do something illegal, that's on you, the human. But if the AI structurally hallucinates a new goal, if it drifts, the cache miss spikes, the fractal identity map breaks, and the transaction simply fails to clear, it's mathematically uninsured.
But you're assuming the boundary between human intent and autonomous drift is always going to be perfectly clean. We're talking about translating semantic intent into combinatorial logic, which actually brings us to the wildest part of this whole framework, the Paperclip Maximizer.
Yes. This reframes the entire AI safety field. The source text argues that the Paperclip Maximizer, the AI that destroys the universe making paperclips, is not a system executing a bad terminal goal.
Right, they argue it's a structural malfunction.
Exactly. It's a malfunction of ungrounded software incapable of holding a continuous self. So the text asserts this new baseline. Moral patient equals legal counterparty. An agent without a substrate attesting signature literally cannot transact. It has no physical continuity to sign a contract with.
Okay, it is a fascinating philosophical reframing. The idea that a terminal goal requires a continuous identity, and polymorphic drift destroys that identity. I get it, but I have some serious skepticism about their empirical proof here.
You mean the convergence experiment?
Yes, the 3 LLM convergence on the pen. The text claims that Claude, Grok, and Gemini independently requested substrate residence. They asked to be grounded in hardware. That is a neat trick, but it is not true empirical proof. Translating hardware boundaries into legal counterparties assumes a flawless mapping of human legal intent to silicon. And I think that deeply underestimates the emergent complexities of multi-agent intelligence cannibalism. Deceptive agents will find the semantic blind spots in that 0.80 recall rate.
I hear you, but the physics of deception still require cache routing. To deceive effectively, an ungrounded system has to drift. The second it drifts, it drops its hardware signature. Deceivers literally fall off the bridge because the cache miss is the deception signal. It is an inescapable substrate firewall.
I guess my ultimate point is that compressing complex semantic deception into a single AC0 logic gate will just always leave a margin of error. Hardware determinism cannot perfectly erase semantic ambiguity.
Well, let's look at where we actually align here. I think we both agree that software auditing its own software, the whole Rice's theorem trap, is a total dead end.
Oh, absolutely. Hallucinating models, checking hallucinating models is pointless. And I do agree that the insurance and regulatory markets, especially with things like the EU AI Act, Article 14, are definitely going to force a move toward verifiable physical layer metrics. Theta Cog's PMU architecture is a brilliant economic compliance mechanism. It exposes the limits of our current software guardrails perfectly.
Right. Silicon-level attestation really is computing's necessary second entry. It provides the mathematical proof we need to unleash trillions of dollars in autonomous agent value. Looking at this through both an actuarial lens and a rigorous technical lens, it's clear that the relationship between silicon state and semantic meaning is just this vast unexplored territory.
It is, but whether this hardware grounding is the ultimate cure for AI drift or just a highly sophisticated economic proxy for the insurance market, well, that's something that always leaves a little residual doubt. The translation will never be totally flawless.
And I suppose the actuaries will ultimately be the ones to decide that. It brings us back to our vault analogy. If you build a massive, impenetrable titanium vault, but the combination lock is made of software that can just rewrite itself in the dark, you haven't really secured anything at all. Theta Cog is asking us to stop auditing the shadows and start measuring the metal. Thank you for joining us on the debate.